December 1943. A German general stared at an intelligence report showing American factories producing one B-24 bomber every single hour, and his hands began to shake because he suddenly realized Germany wasn't fighting an army. They were fighting an entire continent that had transformed itself into an unstoppable war machine. But here's what haunts historians to this day. At what exact moment did the German High Command realize they had already lost the war before it truly began? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Winter came early to East Prussia in 1942, and inside the heavy concrete walls of the Wolfschanze, the air smelled of cigarette smoke and damp wool. The Wolf's Lair, they called it, Hitler's fortress hidden deep in the forest. This was where Germany's top generals gathered around long wooden tables covered with maps. Maps of Europe painted mostly in German gray. From the frozen fields outside Moscow to the warm beaches of France, German soldiers stood guard. The Third Reich controlled more land than any German leader in history. General Oberst Klaus von Steinhoff walked through the cold hallways that December morning. His boots clicked against the stone floors. At 58 years old, his back still stood straight as a rifle. He had fought in the First Great War, back when he was just a young lieutenant in the trenches. Now, silver hair showed beneath his officer's cap. His uniform carried the weight of medals earned across 2 wars. Von Steinhoff believed in 3 things above all else: German engineering, Prussian discipline, and the natural order that placed Germany at the top of the world's nations. The map room felt warmer than the hallways, heated by a wood stove that crackled in the corner. Other officers already stood around the main table. Oberst Friedrich Hartmann was there, younger than von Steinhoff by 16 years, his uniform perfectly pressed even this early in the morning. Hartmann ran intelligence operations. He spoke English and French. He read reports from spies across the world. His eyes moved quickly, always thinking, always measuring. Near the head of the table stood General Feldmarschall Wilhelm Keitel, the chief of the entire German High Command. Keitel never disagreed with Hitler, not once, not ever. Everyone knew this. On the table lay stacks of paper, intelligence reports, photographs taken by reconnaissance planes, radio intercepts decoded by German cipher clerks. This morning's meeting would discuss America. The United States had been in the war for exactly 1 year now, since the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. For months, German U-boats had been sinking American ships in the Atlantic. German propagandists called it the happy time because the submarines found such easy targets. American sailors drowned in cold water while their ships burned on the horizon. Von Steinhoff poured himself coffee from a metal pot, real coffee, though not much of it. Even here, at the highest levels of command, rations had started to shrink. The German economy had been on war footing for years now. Every factory made weapons or ammunition or uniforms. Every farm grew food for soldiers. Every drop of fuel went to tanks or planes. German families waited in long lines for bread. They received cards that told them exactly how much butter they could buy each week, how much meat, how much sugar. The word sacrifice appeared on posters throughout Berlin. Sacrifice for the fatherland. Sacrifice for victory. But the generals didn't talk much about sacrifice this morning. They talked about America, and mostly they laughed. "Look at this," said an artillery colonel, holding up a photograph. "This is supposed to be an American tank factory in Detroit." The photo showed a large building with many windows. "My sources say they claim to produce hundreds of these machines every month. Hundreds! It's clearly propaganda." Other officers chuckled. Von Steinhoff smiled too, though he didn't laugh out loud. Everyone knew about Americans. They made jazz music and Hollywood movies. They drank Coca-Cola and ate too much. Their soldiers had never faced real combat like the Wehrmacht had. They had no tradition of military excellence like Prussia, no warrior culture like Germany. Americans were soft, spoiled by easy living and too much democracy. How could a nation of factory workers and farmers possibly stand against the German military machine? Keitel nodded along with the laughter. "The Americans have money," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "But they don't have spirit. They don't have will. One good defeat, and they'll sue for peace. They always do." Hartmann stood quietly at the side of the table. His face didn't show the same confidence. He held a folder thick with documents. When the laughter died down, he cleared his throat. "Gentlemen," Hartmann said softly, "I have some reports that require your attention." He spread papers across the map, photographs of American shipyards. Von Steinhoff stepped closer to look. The images showed something that made him pause. In one photograph, he counted 7 large ships under construction at the same time, in the same yard. Not fishing boats or cargo vessels. These were Liberty ships, the kind that carried tanks and trucks and supplies across the Atlantic. "This is from Baltimore," Hartmann explained. "This photograph is 3 weeks old. Our agents confirm that American shipyards are now completing multiple Liberty ships every single day, not every week, every day." The room grew quieter. An officer picked up one of the photographs, holding it close to his face. "Every day?" someone asked. "The reports are consistent across multiple sources," Hartmann continued. He pulled out another document. "This is more concerning. Our intelligence service has obtained production estimates from Henry Ford's new facility. They call it Willow Run. It's in Michigan. According to these figures, when the plant reaches full capacity, it will produce 1 B-24 bomber every single hour." Now the room fell completely silent. Von Steinhoff stared at the paper in Hartmann's hand. 1 bomber per hour? That would mean 24 bombers per day. That would mean over 8,000 bombers per year, from just one factory. The number seemed impossible, insane. "That can't be correct," von Steinhoff said, his voice steady but firm. "Check your sources again, Hartmann. Someone is feeding you false information, probably American intelligence trying to scare us." "I've checked 3 times, sir," Hartmann replied. "Different sources, different methods of gathering. The numbers all match." Keitel waved his hand again, more forcefully this time. "Even if it's true, it doesn't matter. Quantity without quality means nothing. 1 German Panzer is worth 5 American tanks. 1 Luftwaffe pilot is worth 10 of theirs. The Americans have no experience, no tradition. They'll learn what real war means when they face us." Other officers nodded. Some of the confidence returned to the room. Yes, that made sense. German tanks were superior. German soldiers were better trained. Everyone knew this. The Tiger tank could destroy any Allied tank from a distance. German machine guns fired faster. German tactics were proven in battle after battle. The Wehrmacht had crushed Poland in weeks, France in months. They had driven deep into Russia despite the endless winter. Surely some American factories couldn't change these basic facts. But von Steinhoff kept looking at the photographs. Something bothered him. He picked up an image showing rows and rows of American tanks lined up outside a factory. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They stretched back until they became tiny dots in the distance. He had visited German tank factories. They produced perhaps 20 tanks per month, 30 if everything went perfectly. But this single photograph showed more tanks than Germany produced in half a year. Hartmann pulled out one more document. "There's something else," he said quietly. "U-boat commanders are reporting unusual observations. They say that when they sink American cargo ships, more ships appear within days, sometimes within hours. They describe convoys that stretch from horizon to horizon. One commander estimated he would need to sink 2 ships every single day just to keep pace with American production, and we don't have enough U-boats to do that." An uncomfortable feeling settled over von Steinhoff's chest. Not fear exactly, not yet, but something like the first touch of cold wind before a storm. He thought about German production. Germany controlled most of Europe now. They had factories in France, in Czechoslovakia, in Poland. They had steel mills in the Ruhr Valley. They had the best engineers in the world. And yet these reports suggested that America, fighting a war across 2 oceans, could produce more than all of German-controlled Europe combined? Impossible, he said again, but this time his voice carried less certainty. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The meeting continued for another hour. They discussed other matters: Russian troop movements, British bombing raids, supply lines in North Africa. But von Steinhoff's mind kept returning to those photographs, those numbers. 1 bomber per hour, multiple ships per day, convoys from horizon to horizon. After the meeting ended, von Steinhoff walked back through the cold hallways. Outside, snow had begun to fall. He could see it through the narrow windows, white flakes drifting down into the dark forest. Somewhere out there, German soldiers huddled in frozen trenches on the Eastern Front. They wrapped their feet in newspaper because they didn't have enough winter boots. They burned furniture to stay warm because coal couldn't reach them. They ate hard bread and thin soup. And America, according to these reports, was giving its common soldiers chocolate bars, individual cigarettes in sealed packages, real coffee. How could a nation provide such luxury to its troops and still outproduce Germany in weapons and ships and planes? Von Steinhoff stopped at a window. He watched the snowfall. Somewhere deep in his mind, a small voice whispered a question he didn't want to hear. A question that would grow louder in the months to come. A question that would eventually shatter everything he believed about German superiority and American weakness. What if they were wrong? What if America wasn't weak at all? What if they had been fighting the wrong kind of war from the very beginning? He shook his head and kept walking. No, Germany would win. Germany always found a way. Will and discipline always triumphed over mere material wealth. That's what he had been taught. That's what he believed. The Führer said so. Keitel agreed. Everyone agreed. But Hartmann's folder remained on the table, full of photographs and numbers that didn't lie. The cold came early again in late 1944, but this time it brought a different kind of chill. Von Steinhoff sat in a new headquarters, not the Grand Wolfslair anymore, but a converted schoolhouse in Bavaria. The walls still smelt like chalk dust, and children's drawings hung in the hallways, forgotten when the building became a military command post. Outside, the sound of distant artillery rolled like endless thunder. American artillery, British artillery, getting closer every day. On the desk before him lay reports from the Ardennes forest, Germany's last great attack. Hitler called it the final victory that would split the Allied armies and force them to beg for peace. Von Steinhoff had watched as Germany scraped together every last tank they could repair, every drop of fuel they had saved, every soldier they could pull from other fronts. They called it Operation Watch on the Rhine. The soldiers called it something else. They called it the last throw of the dice. The offensive had begun well enough. German tanks pushed through the snowy forests. American units fell back in surprise. For 3 days, it looked like the old times, like Poland, like France, like when the Wehrmacht seemed unstoppable. Von Steinhoff allowed himself a moment of hope. Perhaps the Führer was right. Perhaps will and courage could still overcome American material. Then the weather cleared. American planes filled the sky like a swarm of metal locusts, thousands of them. They bombed every road, every bridge, every column of German vehicles. The fuel ran out first. Tanks sat abandoned on hillsides because no trucks could bring gasoline. Then the ammunition ran out. Then the food. German soldiers attacked American positions with empty rifles because they had no bullets left. And the Americans? They brought more, always more. Von Steinhoff read the reports with hands that had started to shake. The Americans had rushed entire divisions to the battle within 48 hours. Not just soldiers, but tanks, trucks, artillery, ammunition, food, medical supplies, everything an army needed. Within 1 week, they had replaced every loss from the first days of fighting. Within 2 weeks, they had more forces in the Ardennes than when the battle began. A young lieutenant brought him another stack of papers. Debriefing reports from German prisoners who had been held in America and recently exchanged through Switzerland due to wounds. Von Steinhoff had been reading these reports for weeks now, and each one felt like a hammer blow to everything he thought he knew about the world. One report came from a Luftwaffe pilot shot down over Texas. The man described being driven past an automobile factory on his way to the prison camp. He said the building stretched for over a mile. A mile. He said he watched cars roll off the assembly line, one after another, like toys from a machine. The guards told him this single factory made more vehicles in 1 day than all of Germany made in a week. The pilot wrote that he didn't believe it at first. Then they drove past another factory, and another, and another. Another report came from a U-boat sailor held in a camp in Kansas. Kansas, the middle of America, so far from any ocean that the sailor said he forgot what salt water smelled like. The camp fed them 3 times every day, real meat, fresh bread, vegetables. On Sunday, they received ice cream for dessert. Ice cream in a prison camp in the middle of a war. The sailor wrote that he gained weight as a prisoner in America. He ate better than he had eaten as a free man in Germany for the past 5 years. Von Steinhoff set down that report and picked up another. This one came from a Wehrmacht officer captured in North Africa. The Americans had taken him to a factory tour before shipping him to a permanent camp. They wanted prisoners to see American production. The officer described standing on a platform watching a production line make artillery shells. He counted 120 shells completed in the time he stood there watching. 20 minutes. 120 shells. He calculated that this single production line made more ammunition in 1 day than his entire division had fired in the Battle of France. The words blurred on the page. Von Steinhoff removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The small office felt too warm despite the winter cold outside. His uniform hung looser now. Food had become scarce even for generals. The coffee on his desk was made from roasted acorns. It tasted like dirt. He thought about the American soldiers he had seen in photographs. Young men, most of them. Farm boys and city workers who had been civilians 2 years ago. They wore uniforms that fit properly. They carried rifles that were mass-produced but worked perfectly. They rode in trucks that never seemed to break down. They ate from ration boxes that contained chocolate and cigarettes and real coffee. Not because they were special, not because they were officers, because America made enough of everything for everyone. The ideology that von Steinhoff had believed his entire adult life said that such prosperity made men weak, soft, unable to fight, unable to sacrifice. The ideology said that hardship created strong soldiers, that suffering built character, that denial and discipline and iron will were what won wars. Look at Sparta, the ideology said. Look at Prussia. Look at Germany. Strength came from sacrifice. But what von Steinhoff saw now told a different story. America had created strength from abundance. They didn't need every citizen to sacrifice because they made enough for everyone. Their workers didn't live in barracks. They lived in houses with electricity and running water. They drove automobiles to factories where they built more automobiles. And somehow, impossibly, this prosperity had been transformed into a war machine that Germany could not match. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out his personal diary. The leather cover was worn now, soft from years of handling. He opened to a blank page and began to write, not as a general making an official report, but as a man trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. "We believed that willpower could overcome material wealth," he wrote slowly, forming each word with care. "We believed that our discipline and sacrifice made us stronger than nations that lived in comfort. We were taught that the Americans were weak because they had too much food, too much luxury, too much freedom. We laughed at them. We called them soft. We were certain that when they faced real war, they would break." His hand paused. Outside, the artillery grew louder. American guns. Always American guns now. He continued writing. "But we were wrong about everything. The Americans are not weak because of their abundance. They are strong because of it. A worker who goes home to a warm house and a full dinner can work harder the next day. A soldier who knows his family is safe and fed will fight better. A nation that produces enough for everyone can also produce enough to bury its enemies in steel and fire. We called them materialistic, as if that were an insult. But materialism means making things, and they made more things than we could ever destroy." Von Steinhoff stopped writing and stared at the words on the page. They felt like betrayal, like admitting defeat not just in battle, but in belief. Everything he had been taught, everything he had trusted, the ideology that had shaped his entire military career, it was all wrong. Not wrong in small ways, wrong at the foundation, wrong in every way that mattered. Von Steinhoff stopped writing and stared at the words on the page. They felt like betrayal, like admitting defeat not just in battle, but in belief. Everything he had been taught, everything he had trusted, the ideology that had shaped his entire military career, it was all wrong. Not wrong in small ways, wrong at the foundation, wrong in every way that mattered. Von Steinhoff stopped writing and stared at the words on the page. They felt like betrayal, like admitting defeat not just in battle, but in belief. Everything he had been taught, everything he had trusted, the ideology that had shaped his entire military career, it was all wrong. Not wrong in small ways, wrong at the foundation, wrong in every way that mattered. Von Steinhoff stopped writing and stared at the words on the page. Germany had built its war machine on sacrifice and scarcity. America had built its war machine on prosperity and surplus. And surplus, it turned out, was stronger, much stronger. You could make men charge into machine gun fire through discipline and ideology, but you couldn't make tanks appear from empty factories. You couldn't will ammunition into existence. You couldn't sacrifice your way to more fuel when the fuel was simply gone. He closed the diary and sat in silence as darkness filled the small office. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the rumble of engines. American trucks bringing supplies to American soldiers who would eat well tonight and attack again tomorrow. And there was nothing Germany could do to stop them, not anymore. Perhaps there never had been. May 1945 brought silence. Not the peaceful silence of sleeping forests, but the empty silence of a broken nation. Von Steinhoff stood in a line of German officers waiting to be processed by American military administrators. The war had ended 1 week ago. Hitler was dead. Berlin was rubble. The Third Reich that was supposed to last 1,000 years had lasted 12. The American sergeant behind the desk looked young, maybe 22 years old. He chewed gum while he filled out paperwork. His uniform was clean and pressed. He wore a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than von Steinhoff had earned in a month as a general. The sergeant treated the German officers with correct military courtesy. No beatings, no insults, just forms to fill out and questions to answer. Name, rank, unit. The propaganda had said the Americans would be brutal victors. That was another lie in a long list of lies. They gave von Steinhoff 3 meals that first day, real food, bread with butter, soup with actual meat floating in it, coffee that tasted like coffee, more food than he had eaten in the final 6 months of the war when even generals went hungry. He ate slowly, trying not to show how desperately hungry he was. Around him, other German officers did the same. Proud men trying to maintain dignity while their stomachs cramped with need. A week later, they released him. No trial, no prison camp, just paperwork and a travel permit allowing him to return to Bavaria. The Americans gave him a box of rations for the journey. Inside were crackers, canned meat, powdered coffee, and 2 chocolate bars. He stared at the chocolate bars for a long time. Brown-wrapped packages with English words printed on them. Casual luxuries given to a defeated enemy. He put them in his coat pocket. The train journey home took 3 days because most of the rail lines were destroyed. Von Steinhoff rode in cattle cars with other returning soldiers. Young men mostly, boys really. Some still wearing bandages from wounds that hadn't healed. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? They had lost everything. Their nation, their pride, their belief that they were special, superior, chosen by history for greatness. Through the train windows, von Steinhoff watched Germany pass by. Every city showed scars. Buildings with their walls blown away, so you could see inside the rooms where families once lived. Factories reduced to twisted metal and broken concrete. Bridges collapsed into rivers. Fields cratered by bombs. And everywhere, American trucks driving on roads the Americans had already repaired. American soldiers directing traffic at intersections. American supply depots stacked high with crates and barrels and boxes. He stared at the chocolate bars for a long time. Brown-wrapped packages with English words printed on them. Casual luxuries given to a defeated enemy. He put them in his coat pocket. The train journey home took 3 days because most of the rail lines were destroyed. Von Steinhoff rode in cattle cars with other returning soldiers. Young men mostly, boys really, some still wearing bandages from wounds that hadn't healed. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? They had lost everything. Their nation, their pride, their belief that they were special, superior, chosen by history for greatness. Through the train windows, von Steinhoff watched Germany pass by. Every city showed scars. Buildings with their walls blown away, so you could see inside the rooms where families once lived. Factories reduced to twisted metal and broken concrete. Bridges collapsed into rivers. Fields cratered by bombs. And everywhere, American trucks driving on roads the Americans had already repaired. American soldiers directing traffic at intersections. American supply depots stacked high with crates and barrels and boxes. He arrived in his hometown on a Tuesday afternoon in late May. The spring air smelled like flowers and ash. His house was gone. Not damaged, gone. Just a foundation and part of one wall still standing. A neighbor woman saw him standing there in his worn uniform and told him what happened. British bombers in 1944. His wife had survived by hiding in the cellar. She lived now with her sister across town. Von Steinhoff walked through streets he had known his entire life. Streets where he played as a boy, where he marched in parades after the First War, where neighbors had cheered when German armies conquered Europe. Those same streets were broken now, rubble piled against walls, windows covered with boards instead of glass. People moved slowly, their faces thin and tired. They looked at him in his general's uniform and looked away quickly. No one wanted to talk to generals anymore. He found his wife in a small apartment, 2 rooms shared with her sister and her sister's 3 children. She was 54 years old, but looked 70. Her hair had gone completely white. Her hands shook when she hugged him. She cried against his chest while he stood stiff and uncertain, no longer sure how to comfort anyone when he couldn't even comfort himself. That night, they ate soup made from potato peels and nettles gathered from vacant lots. His wife apologized for the poor meal. Von Steinhoff told her it was fine. He didn't tell her about the 3 meals a day the Americans had given him. He didn't tell her about the chocolate bars still in his coat pocket. He would give those to the children tomorrow. "How did we lose?" his wife asked in the darkness of their borrowed room. "Everyone said we couldn't lose. Everyone said the Führer had a plan. Secret weapons. Victory was certain." Von Steinhoff lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. Moonlight came through the single window. Outside, he could hear American soldiers laughing somewhere down the street. They had set up a headquarters in the old town hall. They played music at night, jazz music, the kind the party had banned as degenerate. The sound of it drifted through the broken town like a ghost of the world Germany had tried to destroy. "We never understood what we were fighting," he said quietly. "We thought we were fighting an army. We were fighting a nation that had turned its entire economy into a machine for making things, and they made more things than we could ever break." The years passed slowly. Von Steinhoff found work helping the American occupation forces. They needed Germans who understood military matters, Germans who could translate documents and explain how the old system had worked. It wasn't glorious work, but it was honest work. He filed papers and attended meetings and watched as the Americans began rebuilding Germany with the same abundance they had used to destroy it. The Marshall Plan brought money and materials. American food shipments kept people from starving. American loans helped restart factories. Von Steinhoff watched shiploads of American grain arrive at German ports. He watched American trucks deliver construction materials to building sites. He watched the same industrial machine that had buried Germany in bombs now lift Germany back to its feet. The irony was almost funny. Almost. In 1952, 7 years after the war ended, von Steinhoff began writing. Not official military history, not battle reports, just memories and thoughts for his grandchildren who would grow up in this new Germany. A Germany occupied by its former enemies. A Germany being rebuilt by the nation it had called weak and decadent. He wrote in careful longhand at a kitchen table in the small apartment where he now lived with his wife. The apartment had electricity most days, running water. It was more than many people had. He was grateful for it, even though grateful was a strange feeling for a former general. "We studied all the great military thinkers," he wrote. "We learned tactics and strategy. We understood how to move armies and win battles. But we failed to understand the most basic truth about modern war. Wars are won by factories. Wars are won by farms. Wars are won by nations that can produce faster than their enemies can destroy. We were taught that spirit and willpower mattered most. We learned too late that steel and oil and food matter more." He paused and looked out the window. In the street below, German children played near an American Jeep parked at the curb. The American soldiers gave them chewing gum. The children laughed and ran away with their prizes. 7 years ago, those children would have thrown rocks at American soldiers. Now they begged them for candy. The world had changed. Germany had changed. Maybe that was good. Maybe that was the only way forward. Von Steinhoff returned to his writing. "America defeated us with abundance," he continued. "They had so much that they could fight a war on 2 sides of the world and still have enough left over to treat prisoners well, to feed them ice cream and chocolate. We called this weakness. We called this decadence. We were wrong. A nation that can afford to be generous with its enemies is showing strength, not weakness. A nation that feeds its soldiers well will always defeat a nation that starves its soldiers in the name of sacrifice." He wrote one final paragraph as the afternoon light faded and his wife called him to dinner. His hand cramped from holding the pen, but he needed to finish this thought, needed to leave this truth for whoever might read these pages someday. In the end, American power was not about courage or tactics or even technology. It was about logistics. It was about making things. They could build 10 tanks for every one we built, 10 planes for every one we shot down, 10 ships for every one we sank. We called them soft, but they buried us in steel. We called them weak, but they crushed us with surplus. The lesson is simple and hard. Never fight an enemy whose factories can outproduce your entire nation. Never mistake comfort for weakness. And never let ideology blind you to the truth standing right in front of your eyes. We did all three, and we lost everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.